Capon is President and CEO of the National Association of Railroad Passengers. The year he started working there was 1975. In 1976, he became executive director. Ross is going to explain what's going on in other states and another study.
Thank you very much, and thank you to Deborah and everyone who's responsible for setting up this conference, and also who's responsible for the wonderful building that we're in, and the fact that it's here, and the fact that it serves train passengers. In 1975, when I first came to work for the association, one of my first jobs was to go to St. Louis and try to persuade Amtrak not to do what they were planning to do, which was to relocate to a warehouse district several blocks west of Union Station. We were successful in that, and a mere 35 years later, they opened a very good intermodal station. Not part of Union Station, but probably shares a good deal of the credit for the 212% increase in ridership that Joe cited that the Chicago-St. Louis line has experienced. Our association was founded in 1967 and takes some of the credit for the fact that intercity passenger trains exist in this country, because they came very close to going out of existence, and that was one reason that our founder, Anthony Haswell, formed the association. We have a vision of turning this into that, a much denser network. But I'm pleased to report that the state of North Carolina actually had a more ambitious plan for its rail passenger network than we originally devised. So there's a lot of change in the air. And I want to make sure that you know one of the most recent changes. The U.S. PIRG, the Public Interest Research Group, just within the past couple of days, issued a report called Transportation and the New Generation, which cites the fact that Americans are driving, in 2011, drove on average 6% fewer miles than in 2004, but that Americans aged 16 to 34 drove 23% fewer miles in 2009 than in 2001, and their miles traveled on trains and buses in the same period rose by 40%. So there's a hope that the people in Washington that seem intent on building highways as the only solution to the problem will look at what is happening, will look at their own children's interests. I know that my two oldest sons only got their driver's license after they realized it was impossible to get to the places they needed to go by public transit. You probably know more about the Heartland fire than I do. I say once again, another indication of change is the fact that the Texas Transportation Institute, maybe 15 years ago, was known almost exclusively for its annual report on congestion, which was totally focused on highways. Then they started adding a transit component showing how cities that had rail transit and public transit generally were doing better on the congestion front by giving people more choices. And more recently, they have developed a strong capability in intercity passenger rail, reflected both in the study on the Heartland Flyer and a more recent study that they issued on the Hiawatha, the service that links Chicago and Milwaukee. Here are some statistics about the Heartland Flyer. What is interesting to note is that even though it is a low-frequency service, one train a day, and not very fast, fully a quarter of the passengers surveyed were traveling primarily for business purposes. And 30% of the passengers on the flyer would not have traveled at all if the Heartland Flyer didn't exist. And that brings to mind another important point about, you read about seniors aging in place and seniors needing transportation partly to maintain their mental health, because living in isolation is not a good way to live. And so when we have these intercity passenger terminals that are developed, several of which have been referred to before, they become the anchor not just for 1 or 2 or more intercity passenger trains a day, but also for local transit, and in many cases, there's a lot of other functions that happen in the transportation center itself, so it makes everything much more easy to get to for people who are riding transit trains. Apparently, Vice President Biden, when he was at Brunswick, revealed the fact that the walk-in clinic at the Brunswick main station would be the first walk-in clinic at a railroad station in this country. And I believe in Rensselaer, New York, they have the first post office in a railroad station. So again, here more evidence that even though it's only 1 train a day, not very fast, it does have an impact in terms of taking traffic off the highways. And of course, the question that maybe Rick Harnish and others will address is, just imagine if it was more than 1 train a day, and if it went faster, what would it look like? This is the cover sheet to the Chicago and Milwaukee report that I mentioned earlier, that the Texas Transportation Institute did. And I can send anyone who wants the links to these reports, or you can perhaps find them by Googling the TTI. There is a handout, I believe, that has some supplemental information of mine, a couple of pages, including a lot of information about the Meridian, Mississippi station, which was a $7 million project that has resulted in $135 million of private development in the downtown area, plus $17 million in Hope 6 grants for developing attractive low and middle income housing. This was all spearheaded by the then Republican mayor of Meridian, John Robert Smith, who is now the head of a group called Reconnecting America in Washington, another group worth Googling, whose function is to study the link between transportation and community development and to encourage walkable communities. Montana and northern North Dakota are particularly beneficiaries of the Amtrak route that links Chicago with Seattle and Portland. Way back in the late 1970s, when there was pressure to reduce routes, the US DOT found that 40% of the riders on the Empire Builder would have had no other reasonable public transportation without that train. And more recently, in 2003, Montana DOT commissioned an analysis of the economic benefits of the train to Montana, which is still available online. And it's interesting to note that since that report was written, from 2003 to 2010, there was a 43% increase in ridership at the Montana stations on the Empire Builder. And more recently, the Empire Builder has grown even more because of the oil shale boom in North Dakota. Williston, North Dakota is now the fastest growing Amtrak ridership station. Here again are some statistics. I won't take the time to read them all. Again, the report is available on the website, and we can email you this presentation or perhaps put it on our website for anyone who wants to follow up. North Carolina is a state that 15 years ago I would not have predicted would be a leader in intercity passenger rail, but they became that. And one of their signature efforts has been a massive revitalization of stations. Greensboro, particularly, a massive big city station that has been restored and is now a transportation center and serving local buses, intercity buses, as well as several Amtraks today. And one of their policies is to put backup generators in all their stations so that when the power goes out in the communities, there's a place that people can come where there is power. The ACOM study looked at the benefits of North Carolina's investment and showed the various ways that investment in rail stations generates benefits. Fairly elaborate, not quite as exciting as the alternatives we saw earlier on the Heartland Flyer, but nevertheless, you need to have a wide view when you look at the benefits of investing in passenger rail. Here are some more statistics about the North Carolina and the station program that they have. They also have trains. They run 2 trains a day in each direction, one of which is actually a through train to New York that are the result of their investment, as well as North Carolina being well situated to benefit from the long distance trains that Amtrak sends to New Orleans and to Florida. And finally, some more statistics on the benefits of the investment that North Carolina has made. I think we're running a little bit behind, so I always had to deal with the Senate Appropriations Committee chairman, which was the less time I took, the more money he would appropriate from Amtrak. I'm going to leave you with one thought from that well-known socialist journal, Barron's. March 19th, the Longview Essays on the History of Business, did Robert Moses ruin New York City? And this is again something to keep in mind as we look forward. Moses' greatest flaw, he was a zealot who built a city for automobiles and those who could afford automobiles. He cared not a whit for the working stiffs who didn't need or couldn't afford an automobile. When Moses gained power in 1924, New York City had one of the world's most modern subway systems. When he was ousted from power in 1968, it had one of the worst maintained systems. Since then, though, things are looking up, and I thank you again. I think this conference and this building are a symbol that America, and including New York City, is once again headed in the right direction. Thank you very much.